Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. You can share the screen and start when you're ready, sir.
Okay, let me see. So it says show the screen.
Yes, sir. And you
Can you
just
see?
click on the play button. Not yet.
Not yet.
I can see your screen now.
Okay. Should we start now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, my dear participants. Welcome to this session of the Islam Study Circle that we have been conducting since the past couple of months. So as you recall that we had changed the format slightly, and in the first session we discussed a couple of verses from the Quran and also a hadith and also some specific Bible verses. And then in the second section, we generally take up some misconceptions regarding Islam. So let me start off by a Quranic verse that you see, which is being displayed before you on the screen. And this is a verse 9 of Surah Hashr, which is the 59th surah of the Quran. So let me read out the words of this verse and its translation, and then I'll try to explain some of the important points which have been covered in the verse. As you can see, I have taken out a specific title of this verse because actually it conveys a very special meaning vis-a-vis our approach towards life. And one of the important approaches towards life is to look beyond ourselves and to look at other people and not only care about them, but care about them in a manner in which we give them more priority, more preference than our own lives. This is, of course, a very coveted thing, a very special trait of every human being. But let's see first how the Quran has dealt with it. So the words are وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Translation of this verse is that and those who already have a place of residence, and those who already have a place of residence and have deep faith love those who migrate to them and do not find any ill will in their hearts on what is being given to them, which is the migrants, and give them preference over themselves even though they are in need. So these are the words that need to be noted. They give preference to them over themselves even though they are in need, and those who have been protected from their own selfishness, it is they who will prosper. Now, let me just, in a very few words, point out the background of these Quranic verses, or this particular Quranic verse. Surah Hashr, in which this verse occurs, actually delineates various aspects which relate to, in this particular context, the migration which took place from Mecca to Medina in the time of the Prophet. We know that. So what is being discussed here is the attitude of the earliest migrants who had reached Medina and the Ansar. The Ansar, which of course we know were the original Arabs, and they are also called the Arabs of Araba, and they were descendants from the Banu Qahtan. And being the original Arabs, they welcomed the Prophet very, very gracefully and very hospitably when he and his companions moved from Mecca to Medina. And here it is actually in a very commendable and a very praiseworthy way, the attributes of the earliest migrants and the attributes of the Ansar are being delineated. We know that when the later immigrants, when they came to Medina, they were in all sorts of dire situation because they did not bring their own house belongings when they came from Mecca with their families. So the Ansar and the earliest migrants welcomed these later migrants in a very hospitable way, and they gave and shared all their wealth, all their assets, and also many other things with the coming immigrants, which were the Muhajirun from Mecca. And therefore, when this happened, not only did they share with them whatever they had, they took a step ahead actually. And what they did was that they gave preference to the needs of the Muhajirun. They gave preference to the needs of the immigrants over their own needs. And this is what the Quran has specially praised regarding the Ansar, that they never got they did not despair. They did not enter into any sort of disappointment or frustration or any complaint that since these new people are coming into their city, so they will start sharing their economics. They will start sharing the financial situation of Medina in those times, and this might restrict their own financial standing. This never happened. On the other hand, they welcomed them with open arms. They welcomed them in a way in which they felt as if they had come from home to another home. And the attribute which is mentioned here is that they gave preference to them even in times of their own need. And you can see, my dear participants, the last part of the verse, it says, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. That a person who has been protected from his selfishness, it is he who will prosper. So the biggest thing which is a hindrance to one's own hospitality and charitable behavior is this feeling that I might lose my wealth, my assets when I spend on others. And we become selfish, we become self-centered, we think of our own selves and we forget about other people who might be in need. And it is often the fact that poverty is one of the reasons which stops us from generosity. So this verse says that a person who overcomes his selfishness, who does not think that he'll end up deprived of his belongings and his assets and his wealth, and instead he gives preference to the needs of others, it is he who is going to prosper. And out of personal experience, and I have so many other testimonies in this regard, my dear participant, that it has happened so many times that when at times you spend on other people and you spend from your own need, you'll find that when your own need is to be met, somehow the Almighty helps you in such a magnanimous way, in such an overwhelming way, that you just get drenched from His mercy. You just feel how the Almighty helped you in a much graceful, in a much prosperous way than you when you helped others, in spite of being in need. And as you see, I have often explained, and we have often discussed this, that we cannot see God, we cannot touch God. We have other senses which take us closer to God, and that is that in this particular case we can experience God. So if you want to experience God, if you want to have some experience of what the Almighty is, this is one of the ways that if you start spending your own need or whatever you have in need on others, you will find that the Almighty is taking all sorts of is making all sorts of elaborate arrangements to help you out when your time comes, when your time of need comes, or when you are immediately in need. It is He who descends from the heavens and helps you in some way or the other, and you feel as if you are experiencing the mercy of God. So that is why this is one of the areas in which, if you want to experience God, start spending in need on others, and you'll find God spending in you on you whenever you need it. So this is as much as the first part is concerned, in which we discuss a Quranic verse. And I just to recap that we are discussing selflessness. We are discussing the fact that we must not get selfish and self-centered. We have to think of others. We need to think that we are a global family. It's not just that we are Muslims and we have to think about Muslims. It's a much larger situation. As people of this world, as citizens of this world, we are a global family, and hence we have to show concern, empathy, sympathy, and kindness and compassion to people who are around us, to people who are even farther away from us, by always keeping our antennas tuned to the needs of the people around us. Now, let us go to the next part, and that is the hadith of the day. And this again is a very, very important narrative, which is actually reported by a very famous companion of the Prophet, and he is Abdullah ibn Umar. And as you would be knowing, that he's actually the son of the famous companion Umar radiallahu anhu. So the words are, عن عبد الله بن عمر أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يحل للمؤمن أن يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاثة أيام. So it means Abdullah ibn Umar reported that God's messenger said, it is not permissible for a Muslim to cut off his relations with his brother for more than 3 days. So this is basically a very important advice and a very important counsel from the Prophet, and that is this mutual relationship, this mutual harmony, which should exist between brethren, even if there is a difference of opinion, even if there is something very bad that has happened between two brothers or two sisters, or between a brother and a sister, between two people of a society, and that is that if there is some grievance, if there is some anger between the two, then it must not go beyond 3 days. It should not be the case that after 3 days you are at daggers drawn to each other, you're not willing to talk to each other, you're not willing to converse with each other. This should not be the case. The only thing is that you have to come back to the normal situation in which at least you should be in a position to welcome the person, to greet the person, to say assalamu alaikum, to reply him by saying wa alaikum assalam, because this is a basic human need, that although we are members of the same family, there are always differences of opinion which exist between us. We see that there are financial differences. Often families get torn amongst each other because of property issues, because of misunderstandings, because of various familial issues. But the Prophet has warned us that if this is to happen, that you have to cut off a relationship or you have to boycott a particular relative, then this should not be beyond 3 days. Of course, this three is just an arbitrary figure. It does not mean literally three. It could be, of course, 2 or 5. Probably what is meant is that as soon as possible, one should normalize one's behavior. Of course, this is not required that one should actually be have this relationship of intense love or this heart relationship with the person. That of course is only possible when the other person reciprocates. But in such circumstances, what is needed is that we must reply. We must greet the other person. We must be in a position to welcome him if he visits us, or if we spot him in a family gathering or in any other place. Then this should not be the case that we start hiding from that person. On the other hand, we have to say the basic greeting words that we have for each other, because these greeting words are actually they actually wish the other person. They actually wish peace and salutation, and they pray. They are a kind of a prayer for the other person. And the Almighty and His Prophet wants that if any difference of opinion, any dissension has taken place, anything which has come between us and a very close friend or a relative, then this is of course a human emotion that is expressed, and one really feels disgusted. But this disgust, this feeling of aversion, this feeling of anger and hate must end very soon, and it should not go beyond 3 days. And as time passes, one should get normalized. And in spite of the fact that the other person might have done something bad to us, he might have done something which has put us in a spot of bother, or which is something of a very, very excessive nature. But still, as far as human beings are concerned, we must not cut off relations with any person, come what may. This is a very, very supreme advice, and I feel that in our own family relationships, we must pay heed to this advice, because often we see people within families, we see friends in a community, we see colleagues in an organization totally forsaking the other person, not meeting the other person, not having anything to do with the other person, simply because there is at times some grievances, and even there are at times there is this intense difference of opinion. And of course, we can see this amongst our political leaders, that seldom do we find many of them sitting on a table welcoming each other, or sitting over a cup of tea and just exchanging views, because they have led themselves into such antagonism, into such enmity between each other, that it becomes very difficult for them to talk to each other. So this is not just the case with political rivals, it is the case in many other situations, and it is best to overcome this for the sake of humanity. Okay, let's move on to the third part, my dear viewers, and you can see in the third part we are going to discuss a Bible verse of the day, and That Bible verse is actually from the Gospel of Matthew. And let me read out these words. I normally take my Bible citations from the NIV, which is the New International Version. It's one of the very simpler and the most revised version of Bible. And if you have a, you can, if you see, if you cannot see your Bible verse here, then you can always look it up on a website which is called Bible Gateway. They have all different various uh, redactions of the Bible, various versions of the Bible, and you'll find the NIV also registered there. So it's here again we find three beautiful verses from the Bible, and they are so moving and they are so touching that one really feels them from one's heart. And you can see the words are, "Make no store of wealth for yourselves on earth, where it may be turned to dust by worms and weather, and where thieves may come in by force and take it away. But make us a store for yourselves in heaven, where it will not be turned into dust, and where thieves do not come to take it away. For where your wealth is, there will be your heart, or there will your heart be." These are exceptionally moving words of Jesus that we find being cited here in the Gospel of Matthew, and it tells us that uh, we need to understand that the wealth which belongs to us is actually the wealth that we spend on others. It is actually the wealth which goes to others that is the wealth which retains with our own selves, because that is going to earn us reward. So our real wealth is not the wealth which basically is found with our own selves, or wealth in which we find that we are spending on our own selves. But the real wealth that will be really come into our ownership and which will be of huge benefit to us is the wealth which we spend on others, which instead of stocking it up in our safes, in our own areas, where, as the verse says, that worms and weather and other things and thieves can always steal them. On the other hand, we spend it on for the cause of the Almighty. And it is here that the wealth will never be taken away by worms or by weather or by any other external factor. It will remain there. And then look at the beautiful words on which this section of verses closes. It says, "For where your wealth is, there your heart will be." So if you put your wealth with God, your heart will be with God. And since your heart is always where your wealth is, and if your wealth is with God, your heart will be with God. So the beauty here is that our own wealth is something which is so cherished by us that we often look upon ourselves as people who are owners of that wealth. So if we deposit that wealth with God, our heart will be with God, because with God lies our wealth. It's a beautiful way to explain how it is so moving and how so encouraging for people that instead of gathering and amassing and stocking up their wealth in their safes and their vaults, it is better that they be spent on the needs of the others. Of course, this verse does not mean that we cannot save. That's not the purpose here. Here, what is actually implied is hoarding, or saving beyond our own means, or saving for us which we don't require, which of course is something which is the right of the other of our society. So it's not that this verse is discouraging us to save for our future or for our own needs. It actually tells us that what is beyond our needs should not be stocked up. What is beyond our needs should not be amassed in our own vaults. That particular wealth should be stocked up and for the good of the people. So, dear viewers, we come to the end of the first session. As you can see, the three things that we have discussed. The first thing is selfishness, with reference to the Quran. The second thing is familial ties and ties with close people, with a reference to a hadith of the Prophet. And the third thing that we have discussed is that we have to be charitable, we have to be people who are generous on others. And this we have discussed with a beautiful quotation from the Prophet Jesus, as has been cited in the Gospel of Matthew. So let's take a short break here. And if you have any questions regarding what we have just discussed, we can take up those questions. And in the next session, we'll take up some of the misconceptions that we have been dealing all along.
So we have a question from Rafiqa. Unmute your mic and ask your question.
Dr. Shehzad, can you hear me?
I'm not being able to hear you. Could you speak a little louder?
Can you hear me now?
I can barely hear you, yes.
Can you? Okay, let me try again. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can.
My question, I have some, my questions are pertaining not to the topic today, but on a different topic. Will you be?
Rafiq Saiba, we really are not able to hear you. What I can suggest is, if you like, you can type your question and I can ask on your behalf if you like. Or you can try one more time and see. I think the signal is not that good and you're in and out.
Try. Now?
And
Yes,
it's the same. You started talking and then we lost you right there.
I saw a
Rafiq Saiba, I'm very sorry. We are not able to hear you. I would suggest that you type your question and send it to me, and I can ask you on your behalf. We're really not able to hear you. I'm very sorry about that. Any other question anyone else has? We can take it up.
I just to a different location. My question is, I saw a clip of Gandhi Saab titled, "Is it permissible to lie for the sake of national interest? Can we dodge our enemies by not saying the truth?" I didn't follow this. Could you explain this, please?
We got your question this time. Thank you very much.
Actually, I would need to listen to his reply in order to comment on it. I don't remember listening to this or the specific answer that he gave. So, unless you cite me the content, it would be not possible for me to comment.
When he said that, basically, he was saying that even if it is against our enemy, we are not supposed to lie. And my question was that, can one lie to save one's life if one is in enemy's hand? And another thing is that, can we lie to save a human life who's under our protection?
Obviously, this is something which is of, I would say, of common sense that if you have to lie to save a life, this is absolutely warranted. It's absolutely allowed. And to give you an example from the Quran says that if you have to speak kufr, that is, say something which is disbelief or against God, and the situation is such that you are threatened for your life, the Quran says that you can actually express that lie, express disbelief while faith is still in your heart, because you have to save your life. So words of the Quran are illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutma'innun bil iman. If your own heart has the faith fully grounded in it, then just because you are in a position of emergency or some compulsion, then you can even utter a disbelief from your mouth. So this is something of an even grave nature, much more grave than perhaps saving a life. So I would say yes, that if you have to save a life, if you have to do something which is much beyond or much greater than the thing that you're already doing, you are absolutely allowed, and you are absolutely doing the right thing if you tell a lie in this regard. A lie will still remain a lie, but then it as a principle would clash with another principle, and that is saving a person's life.
Oh, okay. Maybe you haven't seen the clip, so I really don't understand what he meant was that can we dodge our enemies by saying what is not true? So I'm sorry. Okay. My second question is, in Pakistan, after divorce, children generally go to their mother until a certain age, and their father can claim them after they're older. Is this according to Islam? Ramdi Saab's clip says that children, when they are older, are supposed to be asked who they want to live with, father or mother. So why in Pakistan are we following something different?
Well, we are following many things in Pakistan which are against many principles of Islam. But the principle here, let me just point out this, is that as far as the custody of minors is concerned, by a minor we mean a child who has yet to attain maturity. He is a minor or she is a minor. And in that particular case, it is the ruling is that the matter will stand at the discretion of the judge, and he will decide the matter, keeping in view the benefit of the children. And this could be various in various cases. Nothing has been stipulated. All that the judge is to do is he has to look at the well-being and the benefit of the child. This is as far as a minor child is concerned. However, children who are older, who have reached their own maturity and they are full grown-up individuals, for them it's just a question of asking them that if they want to remain with their father or their mother, and that will be sufficient. So for mature adults, this question is sufficient. For children who are yet to reach maturity and they are minors, the judge has to decide, keeping in view the best situation for that child. And as far as the question is concerned, that why in Pakistan are we not following this law? Well, I cannot say, because you see, law and legislation is something which is done by the parliament. And although there is the Federal Sharia Court, which keeps on questioning laws which are against the Sharia, and this process has been in play since the last many decades, but it will take some time to reform all the laws which we have been practicing ever since our independence.
But Shehzad Sahab, I have seen in Pakistan among friends who've gone through divorce that their fathers have been, the religious people have said that yes, the son must go to the father by the age of 7 or 8, and the daughter when she reaches puberty.
Well, as I said, you see, these are opinions of individual people or individual scholars. As far as the Islamic sources are concerned, as I said, they have given us this broad guideline that minors, the fate of the minors is left to the discretion of the judge. It is the discretion of the judge, and he or she is going to decide, keeping in view the best benefit that child is going to obtain vis-a-vis living with the parent. So this is what the ruling is. I cannot say what other people are doing or acting upon, because, of course, they have their own liberty. But as far as Islam is concerned, it is a clear-cut choice that minors, their fate has to be decided by a judge, and that's all.
Okay, Shehzad Sahab, thank you. My last question is again a clip of Ramdi Sahab I saw, in which he said that one kurbani per family is enough. But I've always been told to understand that if a husband and wife and children are earning, they must give their own individual kurbani. So this has really confused me.
This is because, as I've explained earlier also, that in India and Pakistan and in most other areas where our expatriate community is living outside, they are following the Hanafi law or the Hanafi jurisprudence or the Hanafi principles of interpretation. And it is the view of the Hanafites, according to which the Qurbani or animal sacrifice is mandatory upon each person who is earning and is also has a certain nisab. So, as I said, this is a particular interpretation of Islam. And since we try to go to the sources, which are, of course, a step beyond these jurists, We go directly to the Prophet's directives and to the Quran directly, and we try to form an opinion on the basis of the Quran and not on the basis of what our jurists say. Our own research tells us that as far as animal sacrifice is concerned, it is an optional act of worship. So therefore, if you don't even do it, it's totally something which will not make you a sinner, but it is an act which will bring great reward if you do it, as every optional act or a nafil act does. So it's basically a nafil act, and many other jurists also believe this. And I think if you want to more details on this, you can consult some of the jurisprudence books which tell us so. But I've just told you the reason, that because we follow the Hanafi fiqh in India and Pakistan, and since they think that the Qurbani or animal slaughter or sacrifice is mandatory, so that is why you've heard this from your own childhood.
So this question of 7 shares in a cow and 1 goat per person is not really according to Islam. Is that what I understand?
No, that is a separate matter. See that I just answered you in a separate issue, and you asked whether Qurbani or animal slaughter is obligatory or mandatory upon everyone. The fact that a cow has 7 portions, or whether a camel has 7 or 10 portions, that's an entirely different question, and it does have these things. So these portions, they have existed ever since, and there's no reason to question them. The Prophet himself has actually ordained. I mean, he's followed these, and he has told us that in case of a cow, you have 7 shares. So that's an entirely different issue.
Okay, thank you so much. And last is, you said something about Bible Way. Where can I find this site where I can see the quotations from the Bible?
So it's called Bible Gateway, BibleGate. You just type in any search engine like Google, the site is going to come up at the at the top. Bible Gateway.
Thank you very much, Shehzad. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rafia Sahiba. Shehzad, there are no other questions, so we can move on to the next segment. Thank you.
In line with what we have been discussing, some of the misconceptions and something which relates to us in our daily prayers, in our daily routine, is the fact that all of us, of course, intend to pray to the Almighty. At least all of us try to pray 5 times a day. And again, in this particular aspect, we also try that our children at a very young age get into the habit of praying regularly, of praying in a way in which they are able to connect with the Almighty. Because basically we need to understand that these worship rituals are the means of connecting to God. They are the means through which we connect to God. So by praying, by fasting, by going to Hajj, through charity, through offering Umrah, offering animal sacrifice, these are all worship rituals. And these worship rituals are a means for this God connection. So the misconception that I'm going to discuss today relates to the prayer. And actually, it's a bunch of misconceptions that what exactly is our responsibility vis-a-vis praying to the Almighty. Now, the first misconception I'd like to remove here is that as far as the obligatory prayer is concerned, for example, the Fajr, Zohar, we know the 5 prayers which are obligatory upon us, and each prayer has some sections, like we divide prayer into nafils or sunnahs or the faruz. So as far as the obligatory part of each of these prayer is concerned, we must understand that that is only the farz part. So if we offer the Fajr, 2 rakats of Fajr, 4 of Zohar, 4 of Asr, 3 of Maghrib, and 4 of Isha, this is as far as the mandatory part of the prayer is concerned. Anything over and above that, whether it's witr, whether it is sunnah, whatever you call it, nafil, it's all optional. And if you study the sources where these prayers are mentioned, we just get 2 divisions. One of them is called the Salatul Maktuba in Arabic, which means the farz, the essential part. And then we have Salatul Tatawwur. Tatawwur means something which is optional. So there are just 2 divisions as far as a prayer is concerned. The rest of the divisions have never been made by the Prophet himself. They have actually been made by our jurists. So at the outset, you must try to understand whether we're praying sunnah, the muakkada sunnah, or the ghair muakkada sunnah, or the wajib, which is the witr prayer, or the akad sunnah, which is said to be the sunnah of the fajr, which we pray before the farz, or the nafil themselves. All of these are, in the terminology of the Prophet, they are the salatu tatawwu, which means optional, which means something which will earn you great reward if you pray them. But if you do not pray them, then you'll not be penalized. You'll not be counted as a sinner. So I need to discuss and try to point this out to you, that when you teach your children, especially, how to pray and when to pray and where to pray, please make it a point to tell them that the obligatory part of the prayer are just the farz part of the prayer. All the rest are their options if they want to. And of course, they'll earn great reward, because the more you connect to God, the more stable a person, the more cognizant a person you will be. But the Almighty has left that particular part to our own discretion, to our availability of time, to our availability, our mental availability. At times we are mentally occupied. It's not always possible to offer at length. So therefore, the first thing that needs this clarification is that the essential part of the prayer is the prayer that we must follow and teach our children, and not feel guilty that if we are not praying the rest of the parts, then we are doing something bad. So the first thing regarding the prayer is this. The second important thing is that we must not forget that a prayer or a namaz is not just our utterances. For example, we say Sami Allahu liman hamida, we do the tasbihat, we pray, we do read out the Quran, we read out Surah Fatiha. All these are utterances. Another essential part of the prayer are the rituals or the practices of the prayer: kneeling before the Almighty, prostrating before the Almighty, standing before Him, sitting in His presence. So these components of the prayer, they are equally important. They are called the marasim al-abudiyah, which means they are basically practices which tell you that through your own physical being you are submitting to the Almighty. So often we lay a lot of stress on these utterances. I'm not saying that they're not important. Of course, they are important, and as such, we must know their meaning. We must be aware of what we are uttering in our prayer. But equally important is the fact that the various postures, the various components of the prayer, they must be given attention to. So when we are, especially in the prostration, the sajda, that is, I would say, the pinnacle of the prayer. That is the part of the prayer in which our prayer reaches its climax. We place our forehead on the ground, acknowledging the greatness of the Almighty and acknowledging the fact that we are weak people and we are humble people, and we cannot survive unless we have God's help. So please do understand that at times we are not attentive to the utterances of the prayer, because leading our daily lives, at times when we offer the prayer, we don't remember what we have offered in the prayer. Often when we say the salam, we just fail to realize what exactly we read. And then again, we have a lot of thoughts during the prayer, because of the fact that we are human beings, and these thoughts do come when we are in a state of silence. But I'm not saying that these things should be tolerated. Of course, we must try our best to make ourselves more comfortable, more communicative to God, and more connected to God. This is something which is very essential. And this is best achieved by knowing the meaning of the prayer and what we are uttering, and at the same time trying to focus our attention. But besides that, we must also focus attention, as I said, on the components of the prayer. So when we kneel before the Almighty, that means that we go into the ruku. We need to understand that this in itself is a posture, which is a posture of a worship ritual. We bend before a great a great being, which is the Almighty. Similar is the case with prostration. So these components of the prayer are essential, very important, that we must teach ourselves and our children, that they have this very, very important effect on ourselves, our own body. You see, when we are uttering certain things, our tongue and our heart is acknowledging our connection with God. But at the same time, when we are bending our body, when we are changing postures, and each change of posture is signaled by saying Allahu Akbar, then we need to realize that it's not just our words which are submitting to God. It is like our own physical being who is also submitting to God. So these two go hand in hand, they go in tandem. So both need to be attended to. And lastly, I would also like to point out that there is a narrative of the Prophet which many people quote, which tell us that when our children are 7 years of age, you must tell them that they should pray, and if they don't pray when they reach the age 12, then you can even beat them up if they do not pray. Let me first point out to the fact that this is not a very sound narrative. It has not been soundly reported by the Prophet, from the Prophet. And as far as teaching how our children how to pray is concerned, we have to set an example before them. Instead of telling them how to pray, let us start praying before them and acting as role models. And also, the best way to urge a child to pray is to tell him the reason why we are required to pray. So, by philosophizing, by telling the wisdom behind our prayer, is the best way in which we can actually discharge this duty of making our children develop this habit. Instead of using the stick or punishing them, or using or quoting this hadith which tells us that we have to be very punitive, or very we can punish our children for not praying. We, on the other hand, should be very polite. We should make them understand, and don't think that they're going to start praying immediately all 5 prayers. So please tell them gradually they can adopt one prayer maybe, and then as they develop, maybe they can add another prayer, and then the third, and then the fourth. So gradually you can add and become practicing prayer people who offer 5 prayers. So when you are teaching your children, never be harsh with your children. Never ever force them to pray. If you do so, they'll maybe respectfully submit to you when they are young, but as soon as you're not around, they are going to just break away and maybe never come back to God because of this forceful attitude. You have to bring children to God through exhortation, through urging, through telling them how the Almighty gives us His protection and His favor when we worship Him, because worshiping God is basically connecting ourselves to God. It is basically how we keep in touch with God and acknowledge His favor. So we have to reason out to our children how and when and why to pray, and must not force them to pray. And if they are not praying when they are adults, we must also not always scold them for this, because that's not going to help. Scolding them or taking them to task for these issues is not going to help at all. So these were some of the areas regarding worship, especially the prayer ritual, that I wanted to point out as a misconception. And I hope that in future we are all very careful, especially when we are teaching our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Shehzad. So if anyone has a question, please click on the hand icon, or you can type it up. Take questions now. It's about 15 minutes left before the class time is over. Thank you. Unmute your mic and go ahead. Thank you.
Shehzad Sahab, I would like to ask you that I heard in a program where some people said that, of course, one has to eat halal meat, but even kosher meat is not okay. So since I travel a lot, and presently also I'm in the United States, could you give me some idea of what this means?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, and all that I've studied tells me that as far as kosher meat is concerned, it is absolutely halal to consume it. The Jews, the way they slaughter their animals is absolutely in line with the way that we Muslims have been taught. And therefore, wherever you get kosher meat, it's absolutely not an issue that you should find out whether it's right or wrong, or halal or not halal. It is halal. And if someone is telling you that there's something wrong, then you might need to ask him or her what wrong exactly is he or she pointing to. Because as far as we are concerned, kosher is exactly the same meat that we Muslims, the way we Muslims slaughter animals. So there's no difference. So unless he or she comes up with a concrete objection, which we can then search out, I cannot say what made that person tell you that. Otherwise,
Uh, the,
there is nothing.
the other question is that if you are in a location where you cannot you're not sure of the halal meat or cannot get it, one must refrain from it and just eat fish and vegetables.
Absolutely.
You see, halal meat is not just a small issue. It's a very, very basic issue, and I think I've explained this a couple of times here, that when we eat halal meat, we actually eat that meat which has been made or slaughtered in the name of God. So animal life, so such sanctity does it occupy that we cannot slaughter an animal without asking for God's permission. And when we slaughter an animal by saying takbir, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, we actually exercise the permission of taking their life by the will of God. So therefore, when we are eating non-halal meat, we are eating a meat which has been taken from an animal who has not been slaughtered by God's permission. In other words, we have killed an animal without God's permission, and the Almighty tells us that this is not allowed. Human life is much more sanctimonious and sanctified. We cannot even think of taking human life. So much so that even an animal life is something that we cannot take unless we have this permission from God. So we need to understand that when we are stressing the fact that we must eat halal meat, we are actually stressing on the fact that the animals which are consumed, they can only be consumed with God's permission. And when we are eating meat where we are slaughtering an animal without taking God's name, we have not sought His permission, and therefore this is something of a big offense. So again, as I say, that we need to understand why are certain things prohibited. It's not just a case of halal or haram, that this is to be done and this is not to be done. We need to go behind it. And if we understand the philosophy of this prohibition, believe me, the urge to eat non-halal meat, even if we are in a place where halal meat is maybe several miles away or several hundred miles away, will never arise in us because of the importance that we attach to halal meat. But let me tell you, this was the case in yesterdays or yestertimes. Today, there are so many apps that you can download in your cell phones which tell you in the vicinity of almost every part of the globe that within 4 or 5 kilometers or so, you will find a halal spot or a halal delivery shop. So I would say that you must use that app in your mobile, or you can ask around. But the fact is that eating halal meat is of utmost importance, because when you eat non-halal meat, you're consuming meat of an animal regarding which we had no authority to slaughter. We cannot slaughter an animal unless we have God's permission, and this only happens when we eat halal meat.
Shehzad, I'm sorry for the interruption, but there are a number of scholars in the United States. One is Dr. Muntansir Mir. He is the head of the Islamic chair at the University of Youngstown in Ohio, whom I've met several times, and I've discussed this with him because I was very concerned. And he says that it's not necessary to say the takbir, and the katab meat is fine as long as you don't eat pork. And I met a scholar in Houston from the masjid who also said the same thing. So what confuses me is when you go around and you find different scholars, people like Dr. Mir, who's very well read and has been head of the Islamic chair for several years. How come they give a different opinion and they quote certain surahs of the Quran that meat which has been slaughtered for the sake of the different gods, that is wrong. So I really get confused.
Well, this does happen, and I think you should not be much bothered regarding these differences of opinion, because you see, Human beings, they interpret the Quran, they interpret the Hadith, they interpret various directives, and this difference of opinion is bound to happen because each person is trying his best to understand what God or His Prophet has said. Because this understanding differs, so we have been asked to study these dissenting views and follow the one regarding which our own intellect is satisfied. So we just cannot have this option that every person has the same opinion. This is simply not possible humanly. Humanly, it's not possible. Even the Sahaba used to differ with each other in front of the Prophet and after him, and they had their own specific views because you see, human understanding is something which varies from person to person, and this is the case here as well. If you've heard Dr. Mir, if you heard any other scholar saying something that you find different, you ask for the reasoning. And similarly, you ask for the reasoning for some other scholar which has a different view, and then you settle for the reasoning which appeals to your own intellect, because God is not going to ask you what other people say or believe. He is going to ask you what you thought regarding a particular point of view. So I would say that this is a case of in which you have to exercise a little more patience, and you have to go a little more. You have to put yourself in a little bother by studying the dissenting opinions and then trying to find out which to your own intellect is the best one, and then you're liable to follow that. This is the situation that we do in our daily lives. When we go to a doctor to show ourselves, at times one doctor tells us that this medicine is the right thing to do. And when we go to another doctor of the same field for the same sickness, he tells us that this is entirely wrong that you're taking that medicine, you must take another medicine. And what do? At that particular time also we do get confused, but then it is the stature of the doctor, it is the way he deals with the patients and the arguments that he offers when he is giving you the medicine which convinces us. So this is what we do in our daily lives. All that we need to do is that we have to extend this attitude in religion as well.
Dr. Shehzad, Dr. Mir read out the quotations from the Quran to me, and there are two different ayats, and which he explained to me. And according to him, if you this clearly says that it is totally okay, and you must say Bismillah, but what is forbidden is what I've already mentioned to you. So, you're right.
I think it is probably beyond the
Scope of this discussion today, because it will be difficult for us to discuss specific verses. I can help you out in a probably when you can, if you can talk to me otherwise, so that I can go through the verses along with you. But for the moment, I can tell you that we have written on this issue a lot. You can just do a comparative study. We have cited the opinions of other people and the way we see this issue. If you can send your email, I can send you some of the details regarding these conflicting opinions and the arguments each has, and then you can make up your own mind. So I think it's not the problem is that making up our own mind is something that we need to get used to. What we are generally used to is that we want one single opinion thrust upon us, and we just want to blindly follow it. The approach of religion is entirely different. It says that it's not that the Quran has come down with a tafsir or with an interpretation. The Quran has just come down as a text. Interpretation of a text is a human endeavor, and that human endeavor is bound to vary from person to person. All that we need to do is we weigh these opinions, we evaluate these opinions by giving it our own, as far as we can, our own mind, and then deciding which of them is best suited to our own intellect. Of course, it's not a matter of convenience that if we think that a particular opinion is convenient to us, it's not a question of convenience. It's a question of an opinion being intellectually more appealing to us that we need to understand.
Dr. Shehzad, have you heard of Dr. Mir? He's a Pakistani originally, living in America, and apparently very well known.
I have great regard for Dr. Mir. I know him very well. I have met him several times. In fact, he has remained a student of Ghamidi Saab back in the 80s. I have known him since the past 25, 30 years. I have been in touch with him. Even in our last trip to the US, I was in touch with him. Even now, I am in touch with him. So I have great respect for him. But again, opinions do differ between two people.
He's a very close family friend, and I do see him a lot. But thank you very much. I will send you my email, and if you could kindly quote the ayats and explain them a bit to me, I'll really appreciate it.
Right, I'll do that.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you, Shehzad Saab. We have 5 minutes. There's a question from Kashif Khan Saab. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Sure. The question is actually if you could put the link on the email that you send afterwards so we can all benefit from that.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
With the recording, inshallah, I'll send you the links. Dr. Saab, there is no other question. Maybe I can ask a question if it's okay.
Sure.
In Ruku and Sujood, since we were talking about the prayer, in Ruku and Sujood, we say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Ala 3 times. That's what we're told as we grew up. Where does this 3 come from? And is 1 enough? Is 3 only to make sure we don't miss it? Can you elaborate that? I mean, what is it that we are
Actually,
So as far as the number is concerned, that is not important at all. We have been asked to do tasbih in these ruku and sujood, and tasbih is one form of dua. We can add dua to it, we can make other duas, and we can stick to this particular tasbih as well. We can even say it once, we can say more than once. What we have been told to do is that we have to glorify the Almighty, do His tasbih when we are in this position or this this posture of sujood and ruku. And as far as the number is concerned, that does not matter at all. You can say it more than once, you can just say it once. It all depends on the time that you put in your ruku. At times you are in a hurry, at times you have a lot of time, at times you have other things going on in your mind and you just like to go through the prayer because you have some of the other things to finish. So it depends on the situation, but what is recommended is that you should at least be in a posture in which this glorification of the Almighty, which is called tasbih, is aptly and appropriately carried out vis-a-vis the stature and the majesty of the Almighty. But other than that, in ruku and sujood, you can pray to the Almighty, you can ask Him any of your needs, you can pray, make dua of any sort, even in your own language, and that is something that is in fact recommended. And this is especially true when you are offering the prayer alone. When you're offering the prayer in congregation, then you have to follow the imam. But when you're doing it alone, it's your sweet will and sweet choice, the time that you have. Spend more time in ruku, spend more time in prostration, so that you can talk to God, so that you can speak out your heart to Him and communicate as much as you can to Him. And this restriction of 3 or 4 or 5 is never there. It's just a recommendation. And the recommendation, as I said, is basically something which reflects that you have to glorify the Almighty.
Thank you very much. Our class time is over. We'll meet next Saturday. I understand you're traveling, so Shehzad Saab will be in UK, I think, on a speaking tour. We'll try to arrange Dr. Khalid Zahiri to fill in the classes. But if anything changes, inshallah, we can get to you through the. Thank you, Dr. Saab. See you, inshallah.
okay, thank you very much. Okay, Allah Hafiz and goodbye.